Hi, this is Brian Hegney, instructor of game and interactive media design. What we're going to do today, if you've watched the first video, is then you'll know we are going to model a barrel. But I like to know what size barrel I'm going to work on before I get started. So what I did was I guess I checked up some barrel sizes, and I think I'm just going to go with a 150 centimeter barrel because that's a nice number. I like 150. And I am working in centimeters because we are going to go into Unreal Engine. And so I'm going to go ahead and set up my 3D Studio Max to make sure that I am in metric. So I'm going to go to Customize Unit Setup, System Unit Setup. Yes, I'm in centimeters. Okay. And I'm in metric centimeters. Okay, that's perfect. I am also going to check out what is the size of my grid spacing. So I'm going to right click on the 3D snaps up here. The snap toggle, go to my home grid and say grid spacing is 10 centimeters. Okay, so roughly 15 or 3 of these is 150 because if it goes 10, 20, 30, no, that's 100, so 1.5 of these, yeah, 150. Okay, so I just want to roughly know how large my grid is when I zoom in and out. That's the first step. The second step that I'm going to let you know ahead of time, because I modeled the barrel already. I'm going to remodel the barrel. And there's something I don't like about my barrel. And what I don't like about it is the low poly model. If you can see it here, well, let's double click this actual FBX. And what I want you to see is that I did not mathematically calculate, for instance, how many sides my barrel should have, my low poly barrel, versus how many planks I modeled or how many staves I modeled for my barrel. So I'm going to make my high poly barrel out of a number of different pieces of wood, and I want that to actually factor into the actual sides of the barrel. So I'm going to try to do that. If you hear me trying to calculate while I'm talking or while I'm modeling, I'm just going to try to figure out how to make this perfectly so that this corner right here, this corner, actually matches with the number of staves that I physically modeled. So right now these normal crevices here aren't really matching up with the edges of the barrel. Okay. So let's go ahead and get into 3D Studio Max. Now, if you watched my previous tutorial on how to model a table, you'll know that I'm probably going to start off with box modeling. I'm just going to drag this here in my perspective view. I dragged out a box, and I'm going to go to my Modify tab, and I'm going to figure out how tall and thin these staves should be. Now, if I was a good boy, I would have Googled how wide barrel staves are. So you know what? I'm going to pause the video and get back to you. Hey, I'm back. I just did a lot of looking for like how barrel staves are created, and there's a lot of information, and I'm probably not going to model this. No, I shouldn't say probably. I am not going to model the barrel staves exactly. For video games, we don't have to do that. If we were really going to model a barrel for engineering purposes in 3D, yes, I'd probably get a lot more information. But you know what? I got pretty much roughly what I wanted to find out. I'm going to make about 24 staves around the barrel. And that's easily divisible by 4, which you'll find is a good number when we're using circular 3D modeling objects. And I know roughly the dimensions I'm going to model them. So first off, I do want this to be 150 centimeters long because that's more or less how, whoops, I'm going to do it the lengthwise, 150 long. I'm going to do this now, go by a little bit by looking, and I'm going to say, I think I want this 1/2 centimeter tall. And then, oops, where did you go? Tap Z if you lose your object. There we go. And maybe a little bit taller and then a little bit skinnier. Okay, that's going to be my stave. This is 0.8 centimeters in height, and I'll probably do 8 centimeters wide. And when we add our modifiers and when we actually start creating this barrel, we're going to change it a little bit. I'm going to tap F4 to see, okay, how many edges do I have? Now, I'm going to want to bend this. And I think the first thing I'm going to do is show you what modifier we're going to use to start making the bend of this barrel. And it's going to be the bend modifier. But I also want to show you what I have to do to prepare for that. So I'm going to give myself a whole bunch of length segments. Now, if you did your object in a different dimension, you might add your width segments or height segments. But, I encourage you to follow along with me. So I'm going to give myself 20 length segments. And the next thing I'm going to do is put a bend modifier on my board here, on my stave. Oh, begins with B, so it's at the top. And it starts off at a 0 bend. Now, there are 3 things to consider. 4 things, but we won't talk about the limits just yet. There's the angle that it's bending, the direction that it's bending, and then, of course, the axis on which that angle and direction are working on. So there's actually a whole bunch of ways that you could do this wrong, and only one way to do it right. And I want to bend this. Well, you'll see how I want to do it. And the only way that I do it is I give myself a really big bend. Okay, 64. Now look, I can tell right away that is not bending the way I thought it would in my head. So all I need to do is switch axes, and maybe I have to click the y-axis. Okay, well, look at that. That's a cool bend. It looks more normal, and it's actually using the number of segments that it's using the segments that I asked for. The problem is I think the direction is a little bit off. If it's bending along that way, I want it to bend upwards, so I'm probably going to change the direction to 90 degrees upwards. Yeah. Notice if we did negative 90 degrees, it would bend downward like that. I'm going to bend it upwards. Okay. So I'm going to type in exactly 90 degrees in that bend. Okay. Now this is what I wanted us to look at. That's like a pretty bend, isn't it? It is. That's a really nice looking bend. And I'm going to tap F4 so that we don't see all of the edges. So what happens, I'll show us the edges. Okay. What happens when we go down to our box and decrease the number of length segments? I want you to see how that affects our object. Okay, let me just zoom in. Whoops. Zoom in. No, that's not what I want to do. Okay, there we go. I just want to click in there. Okay, right click, select it. I'm going to select my original box in my stack, and as I change the number of length segments or decrease the number, what you'll see is the bend is not going to be as bendy. Boom. And you'll see if it's just one length segment, bend doesn't do a gosh darn thing because there's nowhere to bend it. In fact, if I click on bend right now, right, let me click on the box. As I give it 1 or 2 length segments, now that little point down there is able to go along that bend thingy. And as I give myself more, you'll see it gets less and less, well, more and more faceted, which almost becomes a continuous curve. We will never get to a continuous curve, but I just wanted to show you what happens there. I'm probably going to give myself 10. 10 segments looks pretty darn good. Okay. I am going to take this bend modifier off because I don't need it. I just wanted you to see why I was giving myself so many length segments, and it's because we're going to be using the bend modifier. The last thing I'm going to do right now, I'm just going to delete that bend modifier, is I'm going to go ahead and give myself edges here so that when I turbo smooth it, it actually looks like a piece of wood. If you watched my table tutorial, I went over that in great detail. Essentially, I'm going to be adding a turbo smooth modifier using the the modification stack, turbo smooth, and I don't want it to like get all gross at the ends like that because that's not how a stave looks, right? So I'm going to, let me just get rid of that right now. I'm going to add an edit poly modifier. I'm going to up on my ribbon, I'm going to enable the turbo smooth modifier. And I'm going to give myself an end loop there, and then a loop on the top, a loop on the bottom, a loop on this side, whoops, and a loop on this side. And if you're one of my students, you know exactly what I just did. And I don't have to go slowly here, whoops. And if I'm going to add one more here, come on, swiftloop. I'm not sure why you're not working. It's working there. I'm just going to add it. For some reason, I've noticed it's not showing me that line for the swiftloop. I don't know why that is. This hasn't happened to me before with Mac, so I'm going to zoom out and just left-click there. And now when I zoom in, I'm going to right-click to disable swiftloop, and I'm just going to move that edge loop closer. Okay, and I did that so that when I add edit poly, I'm going to unclick this edge mode. I don't want to be in any of these sub-object modes. When I go up my stack, I'm going to add turbo smooth, okay, and I'm going to turn off edged faces by tapping F4, and I'll be able to see, okay, this is a very nice smooth plank, or stave. I'm saying plank, I just learned the word stave, so I keep forgetting. Ah. And of course, this is so small. There we go. You know what, I'm going to go into user mode. For those of you who don't know, the difference between user mode and perspective mode is perspective you can often, like I'm going to go into perspective mode, you can go through your object. Like, oops, it's gone. Now there it is, and now you can zoom in and now it's gone. With user mode, by tapping U, well, number one, it takes away perspective. Number two, you can zoom in as close as you want without going through an object. I just wanted to see how smooth that was. I'm going to accept this plank as good. And with that, I'm going to stop this video, and because I've just set up my scene, created box, made it the right measurements of a plank, gave it enough edges so that we know when we bend it, it'll be perfectly bendable, and when we turbo smooth it, we know that it's going to look like a plank of wood. Great! I will see you in the next step when we actually create the rest of the barrel. Alright, bye!